Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some really fascinating ideas today about how societies change and the possibility of a brighter future. We're going to be looking at an excerpt from Dialectical Materialism and Democracy by Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar. Should be a thought-provoking one, so get ready for some aha moments.
You know what's really cool about Sarkar's work is that he doesn't just analyze history, he actually uses it to kind of paint a picture of a more just and progressive future. But before we get into that vision, we need to understand his critique of how societies have traditionally evolved. He calls them cycles of power.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. Sarkar talks about this concept of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Can you break that down for us in a way that, doesn't require a philosophy degree?
Absolutely. Think of it like this, right? Every society has an established way of doing things. It's thesis, right? But over time, people start to push back against the flaws in that system. That's the antithesis. This tension eventually leads to a new system, a synthesis, which, guess what, becomes the new thesis, and the whole cycle starts all over again.
So it's like this historical pendulum swinging back and forth with different groups kind of vying for power and control. But doesn't that mean we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again?
That's exactly the question that Sarkar is grappling with. And he illustrates this cyclical pattern using examples like the Shudra, Kshatriya, and Vipra eras, right? Representing like the laborers, the warriors, and the intellectuals. Each group rises to dominance only to be challenged and eventually replaced by another. It's almost like a historical game of rock, paper, scissors, but with incredibly high stakes.
Wow, that's a powerful image. But it also feels a bit, discouraging. Is Sarkar saying that there's just no escape from this cycle of power struggles and exploitation?
So this is where things get really, really interesting. Sarkar introduces this concept of Sadvipras, spiritual revolutionaries that have the potential to break this cycle. They're not just intellectuals. They possess this unique blend of pragmatism and spiritual insight that allows them to guide society toward a more harmonious and balanced state.
Sadvipras, that's a new one for me. What makes them so different from, say, the intellectuals or leaders we've seen throughout history? Why does Sarkar believe they hold the key to a better future?
Well, Sarkar highlights a few specific qualities that really set Sadvipras apart. They're incredibly adaptable. They can navigate the complexities of social change. They have a deep understanding of universal humanism, prioritizing the well-being of all, not just a select few. And most importantly, they're driven by this genuine desire to serve, to lead with benevolence and compassion.
So we're talking about leaders who aren't motivated by power or greed, but by a genuine desire to create a more just and equitable society. That's pretty radical, especially in today's world. But if these Sadvipras are so amazing, how do they actually change things? What does a Sadvipra-led society even look like?
Sarkar envisions a Sadvipra-led society as a synthetic order where exploitation is impossible. Now, synthetic might sound a bit sterile, but think of it more as harmonious. It's not about eliminating individuality or creating a cookie-cutter society. It's about establishing a system where individual expression can flourish, but within a framework that ensures everyone's basic needs are met and no one group can dominate or exploit another.
Okay, so that makes sense. It's about creating the conditions for individual and collective flourishing where power dynamics are balanced and everyone has the opportunity to thrive. But here's where I get a little confused. Sarkar seems pretty skeptical about democracy, which most people see as the ideal system for individual freedom and empowerment. Why the doubt?
Well, it's not that Sarkar is against the idea of democracy itself, but he's very critical of its current forms and the conditions under which it often operates. He argues that true democracy requires three key ingredients to function effectively: education, morality, and sociopolitical awareness. Without these, democracy can easily become a tool for manipulation and ultimately fail to serve the people it's meant to represent.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's coming from. It's like giving someone a powerful tool without proper instruction. It can end up causing more harm than good. And he even uses this example of the Lichavi dynasty, where voting rights were restricted to the educated elite. Isn't that a bit elitist? I mean, who gets to decide who's educated enough to vote?
It's definitely a provocative example. What's interesting here is that Sarkar isn't necessarily advocating for restricting voting rights, but he's raising an important question. What does it mean to participate responsibly in a democracy? He's arguing that simply casting a vote without understanding the issues or having a moral compass can be disastrous. It's like going to the supermarket when you're starving. You'll end up with a cart full of junk food and no real nourishment.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So it's about the quality of participation, not just the act of voting itself. He also compares democracy to a family or a classroom. Imagine a classroom where students are constantly demanding to be their own examiners. Chaos would ensue.
Exactly. And think about a family where children are making all the decisions without any guidance or boundaries. It might seem fun at first, but it wouldn't be sustainable or beneficial in the long run. Sarkar is arguing that majority rule without a strong moral foundation can lead to what he calls the tyranny of the majority, where individual rights are trampled upon in the name of the collective.
So it's about striking a balance between individual freedom and the well-being of the whole. It's about creating a system where everyone feels empowered to participate, but also guided by a shared sense of responsibility and ethical awareness. And that's where his concept of progressive socialism comes in, right?
Precisely. Progressive socialism, as Sarkar envisions it, is about ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to live a good life, to have their basic needs met, and to contribute to society in meaningful ways. It's not about everyone being exactly equal, but about creating a system that recognizes and supports the evolving needs of all its members.
Okay, so how is progressive socialism different from other forms of socialism we've seen throughout history? And how does it address those concerns about democracy potentially going astray?
That's where things get even more intriguing, and we'll dive into that in the next part of our deep dive. So progressive socialism, as envisioned by Sarkar, really aims to address the potential pitfalls of traditional socialism while incorporating a more nuanced understanding of human needs and societal evolution.
Okay, that sounds promising, but I have to admit I'm still a bit fuzzy on the details. How does Sarkar's version of socialism differ from the models we've seen in the past? And how does it actually work in practice?
One of the key distinctions is Sarkar's emphasis on meeting people's evolving needs. He recognizes that what constitutes a good life isn't static. What might have been considered sufficient in the past, say, owning a simple dhoti and sandals, might not meet the needs of someone living in a more technologically advanced society.
So it's not about imposing some rigid one-size-fits-all definition of equality, but about recognizing that people's needs change over time and adapting the system accordingly. That seems pretty practical, actually.
Exactly. And he uses this really interesting example to illustrate this point. He talks about how in the past, walking or riding a bullock cart might have been the primary modes of transportation, but in the future, we might need a suit and a car to navigate our world effectively. He even jokes about potentially needing a rocket to visit family on Venus someday.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
It's about progress, not stagnation. It's about embracing technological advancements and using them to enhance people's lives.
Yeah.
But how do we ensure that this progress benefits everyone, not just a select few? How does progressive socialism prevent the concentration of wealth and power that we've seen in other systems?
That's where Sarkar's ideas about decentralization and economic balance come into play. He's a big advocate for shifting away from massive centralized industries and promoting more localized community-based production. He even uses the term cottage industries, but he's quick to clarify that he's not talking about some kind of nostalgic return to pre-modern craftsmanship.
So it's about leveraging technology and innovation to create more sustainable and equitable economic models where communities have more control over their own resources and livelihoods. That sounds like a pretty radical departure from the way most economies operate today.
It is a shift in thinking, but Sarkar believed it's essential for creating a truly just and balanced society. And it ties back into his critique of democracy. He argues that one of the biggest threats to democracy is moral decay, the erosion of ethical values that can lead to corruption, exploitation, and ultimately the failure of the system to serve its people.
That's a sobering thought. He even uses this striking analogy of a ghost hiding in mustard seeds to illustrate this point. It's like trying to solve a problem by using the very thing that's harboring the problem itself.
That analogy really captures the essence of his argument. He's saying that corruption isn't just a few bad apples, it's a systemic issue that can permeate even the most well-intentioned systems if we don't address the underlying issue of moral decline. And he links this moral decay to certain aspects of modern life, particularly the rapid urbanization and the anonymity of city living.
He actually suggests that we should go back to the village. I mean, I get his point about the sense of community and accountability that often exists in smaller, more rural settings. But is he seriously suggesting we all abandon cities and return to a simpler way of life?
I think it's less about a literal return to village life and more about recognizing the potential downsides of unchecked urbanization. He's pointing out that the way we've designed our cities can actually contribute to social problems like crime, isolation, and the erosion of ethical values. He advocates for a more balanced approach to urban planning, one that prioritizes community, connection, and a sense of belonging.
So it's about rethinking the way we design our living spaces and creating environments that foster a stronger sense of community and shared responsibility. That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually get there? How do we create these more ethical, more harmonious societies?
That's where Sarkar brings back the idea of Sadvipras, those spiritual revolutionaries we discussed earlier. He believes they have a crucial role to play in guiding this transition, not by imposing their will on the masses, but by fostering the seeds of change, by inspiring and empowering individuals to embrace a more ethical and compassionate way of being.
Okay, so it's not about these Sadvipras coming in and magically fixing everything. It's about them helping to cultivate a collective shift in consciousness, a greater awareness of our interconnectedness, and the importance of working towards the collective good.
Precisely. And he emphasizes that the Sadvipras can't just force this change upon an unwilling population. They have to wait for the right conditions to emerge, for people to become disillusioned with the existing system and open to a new way of doing things. It's about creating fertile ground for transformation, not about imposing a predetermined blueprint on society.
That makes sense. But it also raises some interesting questions. How do we even recognize these Sadvipras? What sets them apart from other charismatic leaders who might come along and claim to have all the answers?
Sarkar provides some guidance on this front as well. He stresses that true Sadvipras are not driven by personal ambition or the pursuit of power. They are motivated by a genuine desire to serve humanity and create a world free from exploitation and suffering. They are characterized by their wisdom, their compassion, and their unwavering commitment to the well-being of all.
So we're looking for leaders who are wise, compassionate, and selfless. It's a tall order, especially in today's world. But how do we cultivate those qualities, not just in our leaders, but in ourselves? Is it even possible to create a society where those values are the norm rather than the exception?
That's the million-dollar question, and I think it's a question each listener needs to ponder as we continue exploring Sarkar's vision.
And we're back, ready to wrap up our exploration of Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar's ideas about societal evolution and the potential for a brighter future. This has been, I gotta say, a truly mind-expanding deep dive.
It's definitely challenging stuff, but also incredibly hopeful, you know? Sarkar doesn't just critique the problems of the past and present. He offers a tangible vision for a better future. A future where exploitation and suffering are replaced by cooperation, compassion, and a profound sense of interconnectedness.
And a big part of that vision hinges on the emergence of these Sadvipras, those spiritual revolutionaries who can guide us toward a more balanced and harmonious way of being. But as we were discussing before, a question that keeps swirling in my mind is, how do we cultivate those qualities of wisdom, compassion, and selflessness, not just in our leaders, but in ourselves? Is that even possible on a large scale?
Sarkar believed it is possible, and he placed a huge emphasis on education as the key. But he wasn't just talking about the kind of education that focuses on rote memorization or acquiring technical skills. He envisioned an education system that cultivates critical thinking, ethical awareness, and a deep understanding of oneself and the world around us.
So it's about going beyond just accumulating knowledge and skills.
Yeah.
It's about nurturing our inner potential, our capacity for empathy, compassion, and wisdom. That sounds amazing, but also incredibly challenging. How do we actually create an education system that fosters these qualities, especially in a world that often prioritizes competition and individual achievement over collaboration and collective well-being?
It's definitely a paradigm shift, and it requires us to rethink our fundamental assumptions about what education is for and what kind of society we want to create. Sarkar argued that true education should not only equip individuals to succeed in the world, but also to contribute to the well-being of society as a whole.
I love that. It's about seeing education as a tool for personal and societal transformation, not just as a means to an end, but it also requires us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the systems we've created. Earlier, you mentioned Sarkar's critique of democracy and how it can be susceptible to corruption and manipulation if it's not grounded in a strong moral foundation. How do we address those concerns and create a system that truly empowers individuals while also safeguarding the collective good?
Sarkar believed that one of the most effective ways to safeguard democracy is to cultivate a more engaged and informed citizenry. Remember his analogy of the hungry shopper filling their cart with junk food? He argued that uninformed voters can be easily swayed by empty promises and manipulative tactics, just like someone making impulsive choices when they're hungry. So ensuring that people have access to reliable information and the critical thinking skills to discern truth from falsehood is crucial.
That makes so much sense. It's about empowering individuals to become responsible and discerning participants in the democratic process. But it's not just about information overload, right? Sarkar also emphasized the importance of morality and spiritual awareness as essential ingredients for a thriving democracy.
Absolutely. He argued that a society that solely focuses on material progress without a corresponding emphasis on ethical development is ultimately unsustainable. It's like building a house on a foundation of sand. It might look impressive for a while, but it's bound to crumble eventually.
Wow, that's a powerful image. So it's about recognizing that true progress encompasses both material and spiritual dimensions. It's about creating a society where people are not only well-informed and technologically advanced, but also ethically grounded and connected to something larger than themselves.
Exactly. And that's where Sarkar's vision of progressive socialism, guided by the wisdom and compassion of Sadvipras, becomes so compelling. It's a vision that integrates economic justice, political empowerment, and spiritual growth into a cohesive whole.
It's a vision that requires us to think beyond our own limited self-interest and to embrace a more expansive view of what it means to be human, to be part of a community, and to contribute to the well-being of all.
It's definitely a challenging vision, but also incredibly inspiring. It reminds us that a better world is not only possible, but it's something we can actively create together.
So, to our listeners out there, we leave you with this question. What resonates with you from Sarkar's vision? What are your hopes and views for the future? And what role do you see yourself playing in creating a world that is truly just, equitable, and fulfilling for all? We encourage you to continue exploring these ideas and to engage in conversations that matter, conversations that can help us move towards a brighter future for all. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.